to actually help our residents. And we can do some of those projects. We don't have enough money to do all of them, so we have to prioritize, but everybody's asking for more. Lead pipes, you know, we're in the top 10 cities in the country with lead in our pipes. The Greater Cincinnati Water Works has a 30-year plan. 30 years is a long time to get the lead out. You know, once the lead is ingested, there's no cure for it. So if our children ingest that, it's a lifelong problem. And so we really want to have clean pipes. And so with infrastructure money from the proceeds of the sale, we can speed that up. I've talked to Kathy Bailey, who's head of Waterworks, and she's like, we can definitely do that. We have other environmental concerns. You guys, you know, we keep hearing about landslides and water and sewer overflow. A lot of that requires better infrastructure repair. You know, another thing, when I first came on council, I heard about, for example, the West Fork incinerator. It hasn't been operating since the 1970s, full of asbestos. It's over in the Cumminsville area. I think about it a lot. I bring it up from time to time, and it's always like, you know, we don't have enough money for that. It costs millions to actually take it down. So, I mean, there's a lot we need to do. The city administration has outlined priority projects, and they've used criteria such as equity, making sure that underserved communities get priority, and also looking at what projects are shovel ready. I have a draft of it. This isn't engraved in stone, and I don't even know if a lot of members of council have seen it yet. But if somebody could help me here, you guys have to share. I just have a few. I'll give one to Kevin so you can see it, you know. Okay. So could somebody, where is Ashley or anybody? Okay, Bill, thank you. You all have to share, but it gives you an idea. You know, equity is something a lot of our, you know, our Black and brown and low income neighborhoods have missed out on investment. And so we've got to make equity one of the criteria for how the proceeds are distributed and what projects get done first. And so that's a big part of it. And you can see from the map of some of the projects the city manager is recommending to us. And I think we're going to discuss this in council next week, that they go across the city. And then Scotty Johnson, who's the one council member who voted not to sell the railroad. And he said because he wants to see some equity in place. And so he and I are working on an ordinance for that. But that's going to be, there's good news in that coming up too. So maybe at another meeting, I can talk about that. And then, you know, economic opportunity. You know, selling this railroad is going to create thousands of jobs, you know, good paying jobs, union jobs. You know, it's a chance for our struggling citizens to support themselves and their families. It's a chance for us to transform our neighborhoods, create jobs, and pass on to our children and grandchildren a really fantastic city. You know, as we say, it's a once in a generation transformational opportunity for all of us that we just cannot miss, and we really need your support. Let me give you, that's the why. Let me give you a quick rundown on the what. You have the handout there that Ashley Hart passed out. The transformation of our cities, you know, so all this started with the Cincinnati Southern Railway being built in 1880. It's a 337-mile railway from Cincinnati to Chattanooga. And Norfolk Southern began leasing it from us in 1881, so more than 140 years ago. In return, we now receive about, you know, $26.5 million a year for the lease. And that money is what we use, part of what we use for repair, modernization, or replacement of our existing infrastructure. In 1987, the Cincinnati Southern Railway Board of Trustees entered into a 25-year lease with Norfolk Southern, you know, continuing leasing it to Norfolk Southern, but this was a new 25-year lease. And part of that lease was that Norfolk Southern had the option of renewing for another 25 years, taking it up to the year 2051, which it did. And so Norfolk Southern has the exclusive right to use our railway until the year 2051. But meanwhile, with this 1987 lease, you know, the terms are up for renewal, renegotiation. So naturally, you know, as with most leases, we want more money and we need more money. So the Board of Trustees started negotiating with Norfolk Southern. 25 million, 26 million a year is just not enough. It's not meeting our needs. And so these negotiations didn't really go well. Norfolk Southern came up a little bit, not enough. We really didn't want to go to arbitration, and we started talking about selling. And so Norfolk Southern started at offering 865 million. We started at 2 billion, and we finally both landed at 1.6 billion, which is the current deal. We had 3 companies evaluate our asset, this railway, to let us know that 1.6 billion is a decent price. It's a good deal. So the other thing we had to do, we didn't want the proceeds to go to debt payment. So we had to amend the Ferguson Act. So all this is, legal legislative stuff, but the state legislator did amend so that this money goes toward what the current lease money goes toward, and that's existing infrastructure to repair, to modernize, to replace existing infrastructure. So now it's up to the voters. It's up to you to approve the sale. Let me say a few quick words about how, because I told you about the why, I told you about the what. Let me say a few words about how the 1.6 billion will be handled. And you have a handout with you, but for those of you at home, it will be invested in a trust. The board has a request for proposals out now for expert financial advisors to manage the fund, because people have said, who's going to manage that money? Who's going to invest it? So we don't know yet. That request for proposal is out now. But conservative estimates by financial experts report that our return on investment would allow the city to have more than that 26 million per year that we're getting now. Conservative estimates are like maybe 40 million to 70 million, and it will increase because part of that return from the investment, part of the interest, our return on investment will go back into the principal. So we'll continue to grow the principal from 1.6 billion, and then the board at its discretion will decide how much to put in. I've heard they're thinking about maybe putting a third back in the principal, maybe giving, the other part, the 2/3 to the city. But the point is the principal should not be touched. It will continue to grow. And that's a real good thing for us. So our return on investment will also continue to grow. You might have some questions about what happens, how do you keep people from touching that principal? And there is state law around that. So if it ever gets below 75% of the principal, then there's no money that can come out of it until it's back to 100%. But the idea, so there is something in place so that it's, it's not at risk. But the point is to never touch it, to keep growing it and use return on investment to fund all these projects that we've talking about, that I've been talking about. Just a few questions that I've been asked, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. So I'm one question is always, what if the city council wants to spend that 1.6 billion? We really can't do that. And if, at least it can't get below 75%, nor do we want to ever touch it because that's state law. Another question we get is if the Norfolk Southern derailed as it did in East Palestine, don't we want to keep ownership of it so that we can maintain control? I get that question a lot. And I want people to understand we don't have any control now. The railroad is regulated by the federal government. We just collect the lease money. We don't tell them what to do. We don't deal with operations. That's Norfolk Southern going by the federal government. And then they said, what if Norfolk Southern derails on our 337-mile line? Could we be sued? As attorneys always say, you can always be sued. But let me just say, the lease that we have with Norfolk Southern makes us not liable. But, you can always be sued. People can sue you whether they're going to win or not. And, you do have to pay legal fees to actually get out of that suit. So that would be wasted money. So we're saying it's true. We're not going to be liable for any mistakes that Norfolk Southern makes, but we don't want to have a court fight to prove that, right? And again, another question is, maybe somebody else would offer us a better price. We're getting 1.6 billion. Maybe we could do better with another buyer. Remember, Norfolk Southern has exclusive right to this railway until 2051. And so there aren't a lot of companies out there who would say, okay, we're going to pay you even more for it now, although this other train has the right to it. They're not going to just give it up, right? Because they really need it. So those are some main points. And I know after Kevin talks, we can all open it up and talk. But, the bottom line here, folks, is that this is a bold, once in a generation opportunity to transform our city, to create jobs, good jobs, and economic opportunity, and to bring equity to our underserved neighborhoods and residents. And so I really encourage you to vote yes on the sale of the railroad. It is something that we can do for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, for our city. Okay, so I'm going to mute. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Quick question. You said about Norfolk Southern having the rights until 2051.
Yes. So the question here, I'm echoing now, but I'm about to mute, but I just want to answer that question. Right. So in 1987, we went into the 25-year lease that we're in now, but part of that lease is that part of the deal is that Norfolk Southern had the right to extend that lease for another 25 years. And they did exercise their option to do that back in 2021. So this lease that would have expired in 2026, they have the right to continue using the railway until 2051. Yeah. That's right, until 2051. I'll get into that. Kevin wants to address it, but that is 2051 is the year. So, okay. All right, so I'm going to mute and turn it over to Kevin.
She already turned it up. Now, Jan Michelle, you need
you
need to mute on Zoom.
Okay, let me see. Okay, hold on one second.
Hi, everybody.
Kevin, wait, let me see if I put this in, because if not, I'm just going to move. That's not helping.
No, you just turn down your sound on Zoom.
That's weird.
So it's kind of weird because I've got to look at the camera, but I also have to look at you guys. So I want to look at you guys more. So folks on Zoom, you're going to get a side view a little bit. All right. Well, as Jan Michelle said, we are long friends. Jan Michelle's husband, Eric, and I went to law school together. We played rugby in law school together. I've known her kids since they were little kids. We agree on a lot of things, and we agree that the city has a lot of deferred maintenance, capital improvements necessary. Something near and dear to my heart is getting our city facilities in compliance with the ADA, which has been in effect for over 30 years. We still have 30% of our recreation centers that are non-compliant. Our parks, I was on the park board after I left city council. Many of our parks are not ADA compliant. There are health and safety issues. The training facility for our firefighters over by the old West Fork incinerator does not have shower facilities. That's where they do their simulated burns, or not simulated, actual burns when they're training them. So they have to go all the way back to Liberty and Lynn to take a shower with all those carcinogenic chemicals that are on them. So I agree that the city has, quite frankly, we've done a terrible job of protecting our assets. And as Jan Michelle said, 400 to 500 million. If you want to take a look at what's already been identified, it's in the city capital budget. It goes on for, 10 or 12 pages on what the needs are that have been identified by transportation, by parks, by recreation, by public services. It's all there. No disagreement. It's how do we get there? So the initial term on the supplement, so it wasn't Norfolk Southern back in 1880 because that didn't exist. You know, railroads consolidated and broken up. It was, the idea was, and the reason why Cincinnati is the only city in the world that owns its own railroad is after the 1851 Constitution in Ohio, cities weren't allowed to invest in private companies. And the city needed to get its products. At that time, we were the biggest city in Ohio, third biggest west of the Alleghenies in the country when this happened, when this started. We needed to get our market of northern goods to the south, and the south needed, because they didn't want to grow corn, they didn't want to grow wheat, they wanted to grow cotton, and then the cotton could come north at the same time. So that's why the city wanted to do it. They wanted to invest to create this line to connect the northern railroads that went east and west with the southern railroads that went east and west. There weren't a lot of north-south rail lines. So Ferguson, who was a state senator, said, we will create legislation. And they didn't like these legislation that was for one particular entity. So they said any city of the first class in Ohio that has a population of over 150,000 as of the 1870 census can build a railroad. There was one city in Ohio that had a population of a greater than 150. It was Cincinnati. So it really was special legislation. And even back then, everybody wanted to sell the railroad. 1890s, there was a referendum to sell the railroad. 1920s, there was a referendum to sell the railroad. When I was on council in the early 2013, 2017, people were proposing to sell the railroad. Nobody knew about this board of trustees because really, Jan Michelle again is correct. All they're doing is collecting the money that Norfolk Southern is paying for the use of the railroad and then turning that money over to the city. I think in 2022, 42% of the general capital budget was the 25 million that we were receiving then. It's not still 25 million because back in 1987, when they renegotiated, it started out at 11 million. Every year it goes up with an inflation factor. So this year's budget has us at 26.1. Next year's budget has us at 26.4 million. And the lease term is up December 31st, 2026. At that time, the lease does contain the option to renew to 2051. Again, Jan Michelle is absolutely correct. But what's not spent in the lease is what the rent payments will be. So my practice for 35 years was almost exclusively real estate law. If you've got a lease and you don't set forth the rent, you don't have much of a lease. So it's completely open to negotiation. We won't be getting 26.1 million. We can get way more than 26.1 million. So how, you say? Well, it is an absolute net lease. Again, Jan Michelle is absolutely correct. We have no liability, no responsibility for maintenance, no responsibility for capital improvements, no responsibility for taxes, insurance, anything. And all we do is collect money. So it is an investment. When an investor looks at that, they would say, okay, if I've got $1.6 billion to invest, I'll even concede that that's a fair price because two parties on opposite sides have agreed the railroad's worth $1.6 billion. If I'm going to invest that, what return do I want on my $1.6 billion investment? It happens all the time. Most Walgreens stores are not owned by Walgreens. They're owned by private investors, and Walgreens is the one that does all of the maintenance, all of the operating, everything. So a passive investor, you or I, could buy the fee ownership of a Walgreens and just receive a check every month or every quarter or every year from Walgreens. It's the same thing with the railroad. We've got an asset and the parties have agreed it's worth $1.6 billion. The mathematical formula is what income times rate of return gets you to 1.6 billion. Let's be silly about this and say that as an investor today, I would be willing to accept 4% return on my money. I say silly because right now, 10-year T-bills, which is the marker that is used for the 30-year mortgage, those are trading at about 4.5%. I'm saying be even more conservative than that. That's crazy, T-bills being the safest investment you can have. But let's just take 4%, one, because it makes the math a little bit easier for me to remember. So you take 4%, that would be $64 million a year that you should be receiving in rent at a 4% return. And we still own the railroad. So the railroad is increasing in value, and that 64 million, again, just like in the 87 lease, it increases every year with inflation. That 64 million will go up by the same factor of inflation. So, and the value of the railroad will go up. So as Jan Michelle was saying, the trustees, although they've not said this, they've not published an investment policy, they've not published an investment spending policy. And even if they did, only the trustees have the opportunity to change it under state law. They've taken it out of the hands of the elected officials and put it in this private group of 5 individuals appointed by one person, the mayor. I'm not even saying anything bad about our current mayor. And I'm not saying anything bad about our previous mayors that were up at the press conference yesterday. You've got to live with this for the next 25 years. And I remember, John Cranley wanting to have a special levy for the parks. And that went down because everybody said, well, we're going to have one person controlling this money. It's the same thing, only it's not even an elected official controlling the money. It's a private board. They get to decide how much they release to the city every year, as long as it meets 26.5 million per year, which is way less than the 64 million that we should be able to get in rent.
Question. I just puzzled. We keep using the year 1987, and if I add 25, it was a 40-year lease. So I'm sorry. The question was, it was a 25-year term executed in 1987. It was actually a 40-year term executed in 1987 with a renewal option for 25 additional years to get us to 2051. Thank you. I've never seen that anywhere in print or had.
Yeah, and like I said, before that, the rent was a certain low number, a couple $1 million a year, plus Norfolk Southern had the obligation to pay the debt service of the bonds that were still outstanding relative to reconstruction of the railroad over time. And the city got, I think the last year it was 6% of the profits. Well, people can play funny games with profits. So, yeah, the city wanted to get away from that. Let's just make it a number that will keep pace with inflation over time. And that's what they've done. So we went from 11 million up to 26.4 million next year. But now we're not tied to that number. Now we're looking at an asset that both sides have agreed is worth 1.6 billion. You know, if I only got 32 million a year, that would be a 2% return. No investor's going to take that as it, but even that comes a lot closer to if they're promising somewhere between a 40 and $80 million return, and they're going to keep a third of that, let's say a 90 million return, they'll disperse 60 and they'll keep 30 if they would get a 6% return. If they get a 5% return, then it's 2 plus 8, $40 million. Sorry, yeah, 40 million. I was wrong with the 60 million, but
a couple questions.
Okay, just let me get through this piece of it, because this is the important part. Is there's no dispute over the need of the city for investing in our infrastructure. The problem is the state language is so loose that we don't know that they'll be doing firehouses. We don't know that they'll be repairing our streets. It says existing city infrastructure, and it's a very broad definition, and I've seen it. Somebody with power wants to build a new arena. We buy the arena that is privately owned right now. Now it's existing city infrastructure. We can't use these proceeds to buy the arena, but we could use the proceeds to either fix up the existing arena or say it's functionally done, it needs to be replaced. Replacement of an existing capital asset is a permitted expenditure. So, you know, I probably would be a pro vote if the state had said, you must use the money and you must use this percentage of the money on these $500 million of existing needs, and you keep up with the other capital maintenance that will occur, because the city doesn't have the bandwidth to do, you know, $500 million of improvements in a year. They don't have the bandwidth to do $100 million of improvements in a year. It takes too long to go through the city process of a request for qualifications, a request for proposals, picking a person to do the contract, making sure that they are complying with all of the city and state laws relative to minority hiring and women-owned business hiring, and then negotiating the contract. That in and of itself will take that long. And let's think what's going to happen if this passes next year. It's not going to close January 1. I can tell you that. You've got, we used 337 in 1977, at least, when Bob Manley and Tim Burke wrote a great brief on the history of the Cincinnati Southern Railway as part of the case. It was 338.1 miles of main double track that has all been improved to comply with the modern needs of railroads. There's also hundreds of miles of spurs and sidings and depots and all of those other things that will go along with the track. Think about what Norfolk Southern charged the city for four miles of
unused railroad spur that became the beginning of Wasson Way. They charged us over $11 million for that spur that was unused for 20 years before that. They had weeds taller than me in my wheelchair along that track. So we can get the money that we need for our infrastructure without selling the railroad. Yes, it will take negotiation. Yes, if we can't agree, we go to arbitration. But it's not an arbitration. It's all spelled out in the 1987 supplement to the lease. We have an arbitration panel of 3 people, one chosen by the railroad company, one chosen by the Board of Trustees, and one chosen by the 2 arbitrators. They all have to be American Arbitration Association certified, and they have an obligation to act fairly and not be homers for one side or the other. And if either side isn't happy with the rental number that comes up, they're not required to accept that. So if the lessee doesn't like it, if Norfolk Southern doesn't like the number, they can't just say, well, we want to keep paying $26 million, so we're going to keep doing that. At that point, the city does have the opportunity to go to other railroad companies and say, how would you like to pay this amount of money for it? And as long as they meet what the arbitrators have decided the fair market rent is, Norfolk Southern could be gone and Chesapeake and Ohio could be in. You were saying there were some other questions.
There's several questions here.
Do you mind if I just want to make a few comments? Thank you, Kevin. I really love the history. That's so great. Kevin is just awesome. So, okay, we have to get the echo out. Really, really good questions and comments in the chat. I've been trying to answer, what I could and listen to Kevin at the same time. So hopefully that worked out. So I wanted to start. I made a few notes. And so going back to what you said about accessibility, that is like a really good point. That's something we've got to improve. Every day I walk into City Hall, I walk up the front steps, and then there's a woman in my office who's in a wheelchair. She's got to go in the back door, because that's the only way you can get in. If you're in a wheelchair, the only way you can get into City Hall is through the back, which is just ridiculous. And, as Kevin said, a lot of our recreation centers are like that as well. So accessibility is a big issue for us. And that's one thing I didn't mention in terms of what this money can also go for. So that is definitely on the list and, and one of our big concerns. In terms of the board, I just wanted people to know, and you guys might know this, that the Board of Trustees for the Cincinnati Southern Railway, there are 5 members, only 3 or no more than 3 can be from the same party. So it is bipartisan, in case anybody's wondering. I know appointed by the mayor, but it has to be bipartisan. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that. And, in terms of, should we keep the railroad or not? One thing I just didn't mention, but that, financial advisors always say, you need to diversify your assets, right? So what we have is one asset in the railroad, but when we sell it for $1.6 billion, I'm glad Kevin said that's a fair price. So that's good. We don't have to argue about the price. To put that in the trust, to take the return on the investment every year and put some of that in the trust to keep that principal growing. That is such a good move for the city. It's really being financially responsible and helping to move us forward, because we really need those funds now. We did try, or the Cincinnati Railway Board did try to increase the lease amount. It didn't go well at all. And so this way we will have, from that $1.6 billion, it will continue to grow. We have a diversified asset, and we will have funds that we desperately need for this infrastructure. And not just that, but for economic opportunity, creating these jobs that our city really needs. And someone said, you know, will they be union jobs? See, a lot of these will be really good union jobs. We're talking about infrastructure projects. And so this is huge for our city. We just have a lot of people struggling here who, you know, are one paycheck away from, you know, living on the street or maybe already on the street. You know, we really have to provide economic opportunity. We have so much infrastructure in many of our neighborhoods that really need help. You know, we have climate issues. We've got these landslides going on. I mean, you know, sewer backup, water backup. It's an ongoing problem. We've got to fix it. And now is a one in a generational chance, one in a generation. This is our chance to really make Cincinnati fantastic and to create jobs and to leave for our children and our grandchildren an even better city than we have now. Cincinnati's fantastic, but we are an old city and we have a lot of work to do. And to have, for example, a firehouse that you know, are worried about the fire trucks falling through is crazy. You know, so we have work to do, and this will help us do it. And it moves us forward. And we're not losing economically. We're getting more. We're getting more than we're getting now. And that will continue to grow. So I just think that's really important, that I really want the public to see what an impact this will have on the city, how this will help us move forward, to let go of that railroad and take that investment and make it work for us, make it move us to a better place in perpetuity.
This 1.6 billion a lump sum.
It is.
The 1.6 billion. Oh, and Kevin said yes too. So we're both saying the 1.6 billion with the B is a one-time lump sum payment. That was, I'm glad you asked that, because some people said, do we get it in pieces? No, we get it all at once.
But think about what happened. Already has lost between 12 and 14%. It doesn't come back if you have 2 years of 7% gains, because your 7% gains are on a lower amount. So normally it is good to diversify, but that's talking about if you're a P&G retiree and you've got all your money in P&G stock. This is a railroad where you're getting rent. It's not subject to the whims of the stock market. Its rent will go up every year. And even if Norfolk Southern stock goes down, the rent still goes up. So Jan Michelle and I are in agreement that we have a lot of need. Some of the things that they've said they want to spend the money on, I don't think that they can be spent on. You know, and historically, water has always been an enterprise fund. It's not part of the general capital budget. It's not part of the general operating budget. It's paid for out of the water fees you pay every month, the water and sewer fees, and the same with sewer. And the lead pipes, if they were public pipes, I was arguing back in 2008, we needed to get rid of lead pipes.
We did.
But it's not. These are private pipes that go into the people's houses. The city can't spend this money on those types of improvements because.
Well, now just to clarify, they're not all private pipes, because I'm sorry, I'm echoing. We'll just deal with that. Okay, so we'll have to be worried about it. But you know, the city right now has a 30-year program to actually replace those lead pipes. And so with this infrastructure money, we can speed that up. Instead of 30 years, it will be a shorter amount of time, depending on how much we put in that project. So that'll be really great. You know, another thing that
I disagree. I think that those are private pipes, because Kathy Bailey testified when I was on council.
Yeah, yeah. So it's public until it gets into your house, and so there's a whole thing there. Part of the pipes are actually public pipes; they're owned by us, and so.
But they're not lead. They encapsulated that.
Well, no, they. A lot of them are still lead. Yeah.
Really?
And that's, yeah.
We're gonna get an echo because both of you are talking.
Yeah, we're going to get an echo because we're both talking, but yeah. And so, and there's a 30-year, the city right now has a 30-year plan to remove the lead from those pipes. So the infrastructure money will speed that plan up. And so that's just important to know. You know, the other thing that this does though is some of this infrastructure money that we spend comes out of our capital budget. And so having this other fund for that will help us free up some of that money to do other projects, maybe affordable housing. I mean, that's a big deal. You know, we need more affordable housing. So we'll have more money in our capital budget to actually do some of those projects that our community is calling for.
We had a question.
So we are not gifting anything. We're not gifting anything to, oh, the question was, how do we morally, I'm not sure that I'm really clear on that, but the question was, how do we morally, I guess, deal with Norfolk Southern? Is that it because of what happened in East Palestine?
There's something.
Okay, so yeah, so no, it's not a stab in the back for East Palestine. The fact that we are getting rid of our relationship with Norfolk Southern, I think is a good thing. As I said, we don't regulate Norfolk Southern. That's the federal government. We don't regulate what they do. And so we don't have control over that. You know, that just says to me, given that Norfolk Southern had that big issue in East Palestine, you know, we don't want to be in bed with this railway. You know, why would we want to stay with them? I mean, let's take that investment and make it work for our city. Well, we're not regulating them anyway.
And I would agree with Jan Michelle. I mean, we're in bed with them for the next 25 years under the lease. They've got the right to do it. We can't say we don't like you morally, you're out, if they're willing to pay the rent that we want to charge. But do we have at least some ways of controlling them, making sure that they are complying with the laws if we still own it? Yes, we have that right under the lease. And in fact, I can remember Amy Murray was chair of the transportation committee when I was there. She and John Cranley rode the length of the railway down to Chattanooga to just see what this asset was like back in 2014. So by owning it, I would argue that we can make them better corporate citizens. We can't get rid of, you know, either they own it outright and we've got no say in it, or they've got the right to use for the next 25 years, but we can still have some influence on it.
You know, if there's any way we could have influenced Norfolk Southern to do more with East Palestine, we would have, but we have no say. It's regulated by the feds, not by us.
Yeah, I'm talking about our.
Yeah, and I agree. East Palestine was a travesty, and you know there are more than 1,000 derailments every year. So you know we're getting out of the railway business, and we're going to take that investment and use it for the benefit of this city.
And again, I agree with Jan Michelle. We want the best investment in the city. That's what we can get by continuing to own it and getting lease payments. I go back, I mentioned Bob Manley. I think most of you in here probably remember Bob, and certainly all of you know Tim Burke. He's the longtime Democratic Party chairman. In fact, he was the Democratic Party chairman for all 5 of those former mayors that were up there. And here's what they said in 1977 in a brief. They said, the Cincinnati Southern Railway has proven to be the city's greatest moneymaker. Its return on investment, dollar for dollar, is unmatched. With proper management dedicated to the preservation of the assets of the railway, the Cincinnati Southern Railway will continue to be a valuable Cincinnati property and a monument to the perseverance of the citizens of Cincinnati. That's what we should be doing, is not getting rid of it and subject ourselves to the whims of the stock market, but keep it and use that money for public good. You know, one of the, I mentioned water being an enterprise project. You know, if we start spending general capital on enterprise projects, the city of Cincinnati Waterworks doesn't just serve the city of Cincinnati. We go over into Kentucky. We go all throughout Hamilton County. I don't think there's another private or public waterworks in Hamilton County. We even are extending into Claremont County and Butler County and Warren County. So if we start doing this and using our general capital dollars on the water projects, you know, there's not going to be the money left to repair those, to replace those firehouses, to comply with the ADA in our Cincinnati recreation centers, and all the other good things. Another item that was put forth is what we'll be spending money on are sidewalks. I'm sure that some of you as homeowners have had to replace your own sidewalk. Now, the city will be very nice about it and say, we'll assess you over a period of time, or you can do it privately. But those have always been a private responsibility. The only portion of the sidewalks that are the public responsibility, the city of Cincinnati's responsibility, are the sidewalks adjacent to city-owned properties.
But, you know, that's a lot of sidewalks. And let me also say that, you know, your quote about the railroad is the city's best moneymaker. You know, I don't know if that was true back then, but if that were the case, it's not true now. The best moneymaker is to take that $1.6 billion, invest it in a trust, and use that return on investment for the benefit of the people of Cincinnati, to get our neighborhoods where they need to be, to create jobs and to bring more economic opportunity. We have got to move forward. This is a once in a generation opportunity to transform this city. And we cannot miss it. We cannot miss it.
Look on the city's website, look at the 2022 pension. There's where we have $1 billion plus invested. Well, we lost a lot of money last year. Our
return over the last few years, our return on the pension has been some years 7% and 7 to 7.5% on the average over the past few years.
That's not correct. It's
yes, it is.
It's 5.23%.
No, it's been about 7 to 7.5%. But, and I'm sorry I keep echoing, but the estimate for this, we used a much lower percentage. The companies that we, you know, like Bank of Montreal and Marquette, Brattle, the companies that we use to give us an estimate use a much more conservative estimate than what's happening with our pension fund.
Well, there's not going to be time to ask questions. Yeah, I was just going to say we've already run over time, but so you have them, but we all will continue.
Yeah, I just have something at 2, but until then, we're open.
Okay, I can't quite stay till 2, but
right now, I just make a comment on whatever you do. I do believe that the railroad was probably a great investment that we got, and I think it's done its job. And I am actually proud of the city for being progressive. There's probably more than one reason we're the only one that have the railroad that. We're, you know, moving forward, and we don't know, just like you said, we don't know what's going to happen in 25 years. We don't know that either way. It is a very, I guess it's a higher risk situation to sell and invest in. That was your comment, investing in the money. But I think it's a move for us being progressive, honestly. Like I said, I thought that was a good thing, no one on the railroad. That's not, to me, it was like over the hop. And so for us moving forward, and not just giving up the asset, but monetizing the assets where it can grow over and over again in the right hands. I think it would be good, and I believe there's some, and Jan Michelle can talk about this, some state regulations where they stop if you go under a certain percentage.
And that means the city gets no money
Right, yeah, the city, yeah, and we don't plan to actually go into, can everybody hear what's being said out here? Because I know when I did this before, I flipped my computer around from time to time. So let me just say, the question, the end of it, thank you for your comments. The end of it was, what we were saying, how under state law, if, we have no plan to dip into the principal, we're gonna keep building that 1.6 billion in principal. But the state law says if we do dip into that, if that principal gets below 75% of, what it is, then there's no return on investment to the city until it's back to that 100%. So there are safeguards in place, in case anybody's worried about all that 1.6 billion being spent and can't be spent.
I would say it's not a safeguard, it's a risk.
But we don't plan to spend it anyway.
Well, you have to spend a minimum of 26.5 million a year. If you don't have the investment,
if it goes below that 75%, we don't get anything, and so we're not dipping into it. And as we said, with conservative estimates, that return on investment is going to bring forth much more than we're getting for that lease. And so that is really the key, that we're talking about a return. I mean, of maybe getting, 40 million, 50 million, 60 million, 70 million. And as our principal grows, that return on investment will grow. And so that is going to be a boon for the city. I'm telling you, this is an opportunity we cannot miss.
Let me also just respond that, freight railway might not be here. Our president, President Biden, the most pro-union president in our country, who just walked the picket line with United Auto Workers, stopped railway workers from striking to get sick leave, because he said freight railway is so important to this country that we would lose $1 billion a day if we don't keep the trains running. That doesn't sound like a risky investment to me. If you've got a pro-union president that stops a strike by railroad workers because it's so integral to our country's needs, as you talked about.
Yeah, but you know what? We've already agreed that the sale price is fair, and that goes to the valuation of the railroad. I think, we don't need to be in the railroad business because we don't have any control over it, and we've agreed on that.
Yeah. And I totally see what you're saying, Kevin, about how that's not for sure kind of thing. And I also understand what you're saying, the conservative estimate, not really conservative, because I don't know if that includes years where there's no return. And I heard you say that you cannot withdraw more than 25% of the original amount. But
nor do we plan to touch it at all, Jan. That's really the key.
But my question is not the plans. My questions are there requirements on this? Because the only trust funds I've ever seen are endowments, whatever. There is a rule. You can only withdraw this amount of money every year. And I don't know what.
So here's what we're doing. We've got,
restrictions are about that. And
so we've got, just to be clear, this is $1.6 billion in principal starting out. And so as we get that return on investment every year, and people are asking, how will it be invested? Will it be in REITs and, bonds and all that? So the professional financial investor who will be chosen will be transparent about all of that. But we don't have that investor chosen. The board, the request for proposals is out now. So we can't really tell you the plan, nor am I a financial investor, and I would not even attempt to tell you how to do that. So that's one thing. But the return on investment, out of that, the board will decide how much the city will get. And my understanding is about a third of that return will go back into that 1.6 billion so that principal will continue to grow.
But that's really not a requirement under state law that they reinvest it.
So we don't need the state to tell us how to do everything. I mean, they put the basic parameters there, and you don't want the state telling you how to invest your money. I mean, they've said, these are the limits. Okay, great. That's good to know. Those safeguards are good. But then our financial investor who will be chosen will make good investments for us. And the estimate was like, I think at about 4% was the interest rate used versus, you know, as I said, our pension fund is now getting like 7%, 7 to 7.5%. So it was a conservative estimate. And we do have, I think there's a slide somewhere that I can provide. I'll have to get it that shows how those calculations were made.
And again, the trustees will be the ones that decide all of this. The trustees are not term limited. In fact, there's one trustee that's been on there since 1987. For 40 years, that person has been on the board.
Well, they've got a lot of experience. That's a good thing.
Had to do with the actual management of the fund, and I hear you say when this was selected. I wonder how this firm, management firm, will be selected. How the fees charged will be controlled, and is there some kind of regulation within this that you must change the management structure every year? I know some of the things I'm involved in, we can't keep, you know, like the same manager forever. We, you know, it's required.
Well, if the manager's doing a good job, you don't want to change them, right? So, I mean, that's another key thing. So the way the manager's being chosen, there's a request for proposal that's out now. I don't know when the deadline is for people to actually submit, but these will be expert financial investing companies that the board will review and choose the best one for us.
And yeah, I agree with Jan Michelle. Nobody at the city is choosing it. It's the trustees that will choose it. They haven't set up those investment policies, nor have they set up the investment spending policies. And even if they met and had a special meeting and said, because we heard Flynn objecting to the fact that we don't have an investment policy or an investment spending policy, we are hereby adopting the following policy. Boom. They can change it November 8th. Mm-hmm. So again, I cannot agree more with Jan Michelle that this year is a transformative moment. Certainly by the end of 2026, if we don't sell, there will also be the transformative moment. But let's think a little bit about if we sold the railway, if issue 22 passes, there are so many things that have to happen before we can close on that. The title examinations alone through all of those different counties in Kentucky. I meant to, before I got here, count the number of counties that it goes through, but it's a lot. And having been a title examiner, you've got to have people in each county to do that. It's going to take time. If there are objections to the title, those will have to be cleared before there's a closing. Also, there have been conveyances off of the property since it was conveyed to Cincinnati Southern Railway back in the 1870s. So new surveys will have to be obtained because you can't record a deed if you don't have an accurate survey. So it's going to take time to actually have a closing. In fact, another item is in Kentucky, in each county, you have to say the value of the property that I'm selling, even if we're we're a municipality, so we don't have to pay a transfer tax. You still have to have a stated value of the property in that county. That's not broken out in the contract. So they're going to have to go through and value the railroad in each county in Kentucky. It's going to take time. Now we're approaching at least halfway through 2024. And we're not getting any rent. So, the investment return is not going to be 7%. And I looked at the 2022 pension plan. It was a 5-year average of 5.25%. 7.5% is what they used when they made their agreement in federal court.
So we can agree to disagree on that. Let me just say, and I'm so sorry because I'm going to have to go. I've got to get my kid back to college. So he had a dental appointment, but that's beside the point. But listen, let's keep talking. Please feel free to call me to talk more about it. I really, really, really want you to take a hard look at this because we need your vote. This is an opportunity that our city cannot miss. If we miss this opportunity, we are going to lose out on creating thousands of jobs, on fixing the infrastructure in our neighborhoods that really need it, on bringing equity to our underserved communities that need communities fixed and also need jobs and need economic opportunity. We have got to take this stand. Sell this railroad. We don't control it anyway. We do not control it. Sell it. Let's take that investment, invest it wisely, and use that return on investment, those proceeds, more and more money for the city to move us forward. Let's go, please. But call me, discuss it. Always open to hear more ideas, more questions, more discussion. But please vote yes.
Last words from Kevin.
No on 22.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank our vice mayor and former Councilman Flynn for doing a great job and sort of taking a very complex issue.
And we really do love each other. So.
We do love each other. I can't even get over here. Somebody,
Yeah,
okay.
Don't trip.
Take a picture of us.